disaster. It'll be just as uplifting as it sounds. I'm Amanda Ashley. I'm one of the attorneys here at Altitude. On your screen, you should see the PowerPoint presentation in the center. You should see me in the bottom right. On the left side, there should be a question and answer icon. You can type your questions there. If we have time at the end of the webinar, then we certainly can get to those. CMCA credits are automatically generated once the webinar hosting site provides the attendance confirmation report. And then that is sent via email within 48 hours. You cannot transfer the credits. If you have questions, comments, or concerns, you can email education@altitude.law, or you can call Sean, who is our education coordinator, and he's at 303-991-2076 if you have problems or questions about the certificate or any issues with the presentation today. Okay. So let's get started. So in the words of Benjamin Franklin, once a year they wake up an hour early. That's not actually what he said. Failing to plan is a plan to fail. And so today's webinar is just about what disasters can impact the community or will impact the community, and what, if anything, we can do when that happens. So we'll be talking about natural disasters, fire, floods, hail, avalanche, floods after the fire, severe thunderstorms, severe winter storms, etc. And then financial disasters. And by financial disasters, I primarily mean maintenance or lack of maintenance, large-scale special assessments, any type of financial disaster resulting from a natural disaster, like when hail hits and you have to get a new roof and the association can't afford it. And this is all kind of in line with the Presidential Policy Directive 8. That was a directive that was actually enacted by Obama quite a few years ago. And what it was is, you can find it under the Department of Homeland Security, and it involves FEMA and just doing a national preparedness. So what can we do to strengthen the security and resilience of our community, both on a large grand national scale, but also in our neighborhoods, in our community associations. So coming together to tackle challenges and to prep for disasters. So as you might guess, there are a number of different kinds of disasters, but the big ones that are really causing and creating havoc in Colorado right now have been the fires. The Marshall Fire, for 6,000 acres, a considerable amount of damages. And then the 416 fire in Southwest Colorado. That was the one down in Durango. It was actually combined with what was known as the Burroughs Fire. And just the 416 fire burned about 57,000 acres and caused large-scale evacuations. Certainly, we're still dealing with the fallout from both of these, even back in 2018. But this most recent one, Marshall Fire, is ongoing as we speak. The Champlain Towers, you might remember, was the Florida condo collapse. And thus far, that is looking like it's about 136 units. There are 98 dead, and it's at least $1 billion in property damage. There are lawsuits pending over that as we speak against a variety of different builders and contractors in the association, et cetera, et cetera. So just for some background, 20 of the largest wildfires in Colorado have all occurred in the last 20 years. And out of those 20, 16 were in the last 13 years. 15 of those were in the last 9 years. 11 of the 15 in the past 5 years. And 9 of the top largest wildfires, the top 20 largest wildfires, were in the last 3 years. Of the top largest wildfires in Colorado history, 4 have been in the past 3 years. So there's a trend, if you haven't noticed by now, and it's becoming a little true to the statement that the entire state is on fire regularly. Wildfire season in Colorado used to last about 4 months over the course of the summer. And now it's been extended. It's about 78 days longer than it was in 1970. So we're edging up into the 7-month fire season here. The Marshall Fire, which is the number 1 on the slide here, has been the most destructive as far as property damage goes in Colorado's history. And then the 416 fire, that one it was mainly, I put that on here because of the sheer evacuation, including the Purgatory ski area communities. And there's lawsuits pending on that because that one was believed to have been started by a spark from the train from the Durango Silverton narrow gauge railroad. And so right now there's a lawsuit filed purely by the feds regarding reimbursement of firefighting costs, penalties, and legal expenses. But the containment is looking like it's costing at least $43 million, which is one of the largest in Colorado history. We also, of course, have financial disasters. The biggest one out here being hailstorms and the deductibles. So previously, you were looking at about 1 to 5% for your deductibles on wind and hail policies, and that has increased to 5 to 10%. The issue is because over the past, I want to say it was 2020, since 2020, the policies are paying out about $1.57 for every dollar it is making in premium. So deductibles, which were already high because of the amount of damage that is created and caused, have now increased. And by the way, this is only for wind and hail claims. So this isn't including the fire claims or any other damages that may have occurred, flooding, etc. Number one, hailstorms, damages to the roof, to the windows, etc. It creates problems in the community because then you have roof leaks and you have, depending on the severity of the leak, people unable to live in the home or having to live in the home with buckets and tarps until it's done. It's causing repairs not to be made due to the sheer cost of it. And then, of course, large defaults on any of the insurance deductibles that are out there because we can't pay for it. And then the other part of this is with deferred maintenance. So whether it's from your roof issue with your hailstorms or you just have an aging building, the FHA is halting loans for communities with deferred maintenance. And part of that kind of originated from this Champlain Towers deal because there is alleged to have been a number of things that required maintenance that weren't getting done. And it's a huge cost issue. And so the FHA is now saying, well, if you know of maintenance that needs to happen, then we're not going to do a loan until that's taken care of. Just for your information, when it comes to condo buildings, which again is kind of where this came out of, condo buildings are actually considered into two separate categories. We have the adult buildings and we have the senior citizen condo buildings. What does that mean? If a condo building is 30 to 49 years old, it's considered to be an adulthood. That means you're going to be replacing major building systems, so plumbing, sewage, exhaust, electrical, etc., pipes. This is just components. So we're not talking about structural issues. We're not talking about whether there's cracks in the foundation or something went wrong in a different section. And then old age buildings, that's going to be your 50 plus. And so for 50 plus buildings, so your senior buildings, most components that I've mentioned have been replaced at least once. And so you're about due for another round. And so in 1980, it was estimated there were over 2 million individual condo units. And now we're in 2022. The units are from 1980 or at least 42 years old, and that's not counting the increase that we've had since then in condominiums. So, so part of why we're teaching this class is to say, hey, this is all stuff that's coming down the pipe. Let's get ready. So what do you do? For natural disasters, you need to kind of have a community disaster plan, a who, what, and where. So FEMA is recommending that you put this plan together that includes like evacuation maps, where people can go, like where would be a safe issue to or a safe location to congregate, and a plan that also allows the association to provide counts to local emergency responders. Now, why would you want to do that? Because you, being in the neighborhood, being a manager of the association, are going to know how many owners you have, and your association would know how many owners it's have. So you can report, well, we have 30 of our 50 owners are meeting, we're still missing 20, or something along those lines. The other part of this plan is it should identify when it's operational. So it needs a start date. It can be implemented on April 2nd of 2022 or whatever date you pick when you get it up and running. Logistics, you need to decide who's keeping a kind of the master community plan, how you're going to let everyone know when it was last updated. How can residents help? If you're in a condo or an apartment building, should you have building captains? Does your plan call for certain neighbors to go check on other neighbors to make sure that they're out? If you're in an association that has a more of a senior owner population, then you need to be aware of things like going door to door to alert, checking on elderly neighbors. Are there neighbors without transportation? Is there a plan set up for that? That's all things to think about. And participating in the emergency alert systems for the owners, encouraging them to do so. One of the issues with the Marshall Fire is some of the people are alleging they didn't get the emergency alert systems. It usually comes through your phone. But the problem is that a lot of people opt out of those. That's the system where you get the weather alerts and the amber alerts, and your phone goes crazy and starts beeping. And so if you opt out because you're getting, let's say, a lot of amber alerts, or you just don't want your phone buzzing in the middle of the night, then you're not going to get those emergency alert systems. And so the alerts that were sent out for the Marshall Fire, a lot of people didn't get. So are yours on? Are your neighbors on? Are your association board members? Are there emergency alerts on? Managers, you're going to have communities in a lot of different areas. So are you set to receive information from all regions? Are you managing a community in Colorado Springs and you're also managing a community up in Weld County? And how do you get that information from both? Are you set up to receive alerts, or do you have a place you can go for emergency weather information, for example? And then in real time, you need to have somebody who's kind of boots on the ground in the event there is a natural disaster to round everyone up, because you as the manager are probably not going to be in the neighborhood that day. Maybe you will, but most likely you might be out doing other things. And so your boards need to have a plan for who is on the ground, who's the actual persons who have who you can reach in the emergency. You have that contact information to move forward, so that you as the manager are in contact with your boards to get your neighborhood ready and out. And then again, what sources are your boards going to use to be informed? Evacuations, we talked about that briefly, having a map, routes, and recommendation. According to FEMA, it's not a question of if you'll be evacuated, it's when you'll be evacuated. They have FEMA basic preparedness checklists, which are kind of some of the things we've gone over here. And it also includes full tanks of gas, reminding people to have those, handing out the mapped routes to your owners. Battery powered radios. If the electrical goes down, we're not going to have cell service. We don't have, if the power line goes down from a windstorm, you may not have electrical connections. So you might want to have battery powered radios, flashlights. Encourage your owners to kind of have things handy, because again, this is something that, particularly with the fires, that happens every year, and it's getting closer and closer. Less so with hail. We haven't had to evacuate that I'm aware of with hail, but certainly with these fires, the big ones, sometimes the floods. So the food and water, the children and baby items, diapers, snacks, etc., and then a plan for pets. A lot of the shelters, if someone has to go to a shelter, don't take pets for various reasons. But the ones that do are going to take the smaller pets. And it's a lot easier to get, let's say, your cat or your dog out of the home, depending on the size of the dog. But we also have owners who are in associations that have, like, the horse associations. And so what is the plan for those people in the event there's an evacuation? It's nice to have a plan aside from just, well, open the gate and let the horses out and hopefully they make it, right? So have something in place as to where you can take the big animals. So here's the manager's role. And much like Charlie Brown, you probably feel like you have the worst job ever sometimes. But we're all in it together. So the manager's role, you're going to be the custodian of the documents. So you are going to be handling all of the insurance policies. You're going to be encouraging the board to have those insurance policies in place. You're going to be the one who's communicating to the vendors, like, we are out of power, or we need gas shut off because it's still running and there's this huge explosion down the road, or the wind is coming in and blowing the fire, or whatever the issue is. Resident communication, that's something that you're going to want to have, is a phone tree. And I would suggest passing it out to all of your owners, but certainly keeping the master copy of the phone tree, and then explaining how it works to your board and to your residents. To say, okay, here's the phone tree, and this person calls these 5 people, and these 5 people call these 5 people, so that it's not one person going, oh my gosh, I need to call 50 people, or one person thinking, well, I don't have to call anyone at all. And then you, as the manager, you're going to be the one who's documenting the property after the fact. So what does that mean? It means you're the person that is most likely going to go in and say, okay, board, our common element patio is destroyed, our pool is no longer usable, the tennis courts came down, or whatever it is. So one option might be to videotape the assets of the association, the common elements, now before the disaster, so that you have it on record saved. So once if and when there is a disaster comes through, then you're able to go into your insurance companies, the association's insurance company, and say, okay, this is where we were, this is what happened since. It's a lot harder to remember those things after it's happened. And on a equally important note, but more towards owners as opposed to managers, is owners should be encouraged to take some type of, create an index, if you will, or some type of list of property that they have. We tend to do that occasionally for insurance policies, but most times it's not required unless we're doing some, like a rider, right? Like we're getting extra insurance on a sports collection, or on antiques, or on jewelry. But if it's kind of just your run-of-the-mill homeowners insurance policy, we don't tend to go out and do a listing. And so it's always a good idea, and I realize most people don't have time to do this or the desire to, but encourage people to go through and kind of keep an inventory of what they have saved elsewhere, so that in the event there is a disaster and they can't get back to the home, they actually have a listing. Particularly with these fires, I mean, how are you going to know when you get back to the home what you had and what you haven't? You'll remember some things, but you know, it's not like you're going to be able to look at it and go, oh, that was the, you know, antique spoon I had from my great-great-grandmother on the Mayflower. So all good ideas to do in general. I love this cartoon. It's the toothbrush and the toilet paper. Crisis and financial crisis. So crisis is when there's a decisive change pending. Financial crisis is when it's almost, hey, it's getting to be too little too late, and we have to take action immediately to change course. So when you're dealing with these issues, we have to look at what the legal issues are. The cartoon on the side is more just fun than anything else, because now we have save icons, which is what that kid's thinking, but everybody remembers the floppy disk. Well, I would not encourage saving things on a floppy disk at this point. Certainly save it somewhere. So legal issues. You have to consider the legal issues when you're dealing with these repairs. So if we have a natural disaster, we have a hailstorm, we have whatever issue it is, we have to look and see, okay, what do we need to do? What can we do? And what does our declaration or other governing documents allow us to do? So first of all, under the declaration, you're going to want to look for things like, is owner consent required for whatever it is that you're wanting to do, or that your board's wanting to do? Are there going to be first mortgage issues? Do you have issues with, you have to notify the deed and trust holder, you have to notify all of the mortgagors, etc. And then the last one is the property obsolete? So is the damage so great that it is not going to be worth, or the owners don't want to, in your association, repair or renovate it? And that comes up sometimes when the cost of doing so is just so incredibly high that it's just not worth it. So all things to consider there. The declaration. So what is in it? If your pool or your tennis court is destroyed by a storm, and your declaration says, well, the tennis court must be maintained by the association, then you need to renovate or restore it. Unless your declaration allows you to remove the amenity. But most declarations are going to require approval of the owners to do so. So again, it's always going back to those governing documents to see what is allowed, what isn't allowed, what you are required to maintain, perhaps what is voluntary, because that ultimately can tell you which direction you're headed, not only in your insurance, your deductibles, and your owner approval, but also which direction the board can go, what authority they have under the declaration. If something is rendered obsolete, there's usually a provision that says you can call an obsolescence vote, but it requires 67% approval under Kiowa. Your documents might require more of a percentage, a higher percentage of approval to terminate the community. So that's something you're going to want to look at, and most declarations, again, are going to have some type of requirement of owner approval prior to taking on a major repair or renovation. It might be in your mind a common sense thing. To the board, it might be common sense, like, well, of course we need a new roof because it was destroyed in the hailstorm. But you still have to have the owner vote to do it, and that's where it can be difficult, as I'm sure you know. So with obsolescence, if there's so much damage to the community that it either can't be repaired or you can't get insurance to cover it because it's so terrible, or the owners just don't want to, then you can do an obsolescence vote. And again, you're going to look at your deck to see how many votes are needed. Kiowa says 67 if the decks are silent as to that. But you can have that and decide to terminate your community based on the financial or the natural disaster. There's two types of obsolescence. If you haven't heard this term before, functional obsolescence is where there's just issues. There's too many issues, and it's either the sheer amount of work that's going to be involved is not, even that is not going to bring it up to the manner in which other properties in the area are the standard that they're maintaining. You will never have that fair market value be equal, or the condition is not easily changed, like they would have to scrape all the buildings and rebuild. That's going to be when something is functionally obsolescent. The other one is economic or external. So that a vote for obsolescence based on an economic or external issue is the easiest example would be if you're managing an association that used to be one of 5 or 10 in a neighborhood, and the majority of the neighborhood is now switched over to commercial developments, and yours is the last man standing, so to speak. The residents may just say, you know what, we no longer want to be the only residential building in all of these commercial developments, so we're going to terminate the association and make it obsolete. So once all of that happens, and you say, okay, we have authority under the declaration, we think we're going to get owner approval to do the renovation or repair, what are we going to do to pay for it? Regardless of whether it's from a natural disaster or bordering on a financial disaster. So first of all, hopefully you've had an association that had a reserve study done and that had determined previously what should be budgeted long-term. And remember, with those reserve studies, it's not necessarily based on now, it's based on what you're going to need as things increase over time, so that you have enough if something happens in the future. If you have not had a reserve study, you probably need to get one to figure out what you need budgeted and what it possibly could be budgeted for. Another option, you can do a special assessment. You will need to look at what is the capability of the association. So what does that mean? One, it means, is there anything in the governing documents prohibiting a special assessment or certain types of special assessments or amounts, anything like that? And then the other question is, economically, what can your owners do? If you are in a neighborhood where you have a lot of owners even struggling to pay ongoing assessments, then the likelihood of them paying special assessment might be pretty low. So all considerations you need to look at. You can look at loans for the association. Could certainly look at what funds you have that are in existence right now. And you can always do a mixture of the three. You can do a mixture of, we're going to do a loan for this portion and a special assessment for this lesser amount to perhaps make it easier on the owners, and use this much out of our existing funds. You can do all of it in a special assessment, depending on your governing documents. You could do all of it in a loan if your association is able to get a loan. So, and then existing funds, like I said, that's just, have you been funding the reserve? So if you have enough in there, maybe you don't need the special assessment right now or the loan, and you just need to make sure that you refund it or continue to fund it in the future, so that if it happens again once you've taken this money out, you don't have that a similarly situated issue. So special assessments, the good and the bad and the ugly, much like Clint Eastwood. Again, what do the documents say? Generally, the governing documents are going to dictate what approval is needed for the special assessment. So what is good about that? The good part is that it gives protection. It gives the board protection. That way you are, as a board, going out and your boards as a manager are going out and doing things the correct way, so that if it is challenged in the future, you have all the steps in place. The good part for the owners is they don't have just random special assessments coming up all the time that they can't pay for, or they aren't sure what they're for, etc. So they've had to approve it. The bad part of that is that the documents, your declaration, your governing documents, might require a higher percentage of approval than you can get. You might have owners who say, I don't care how bad the roof is. I'm not paying it. I can't pay it. I can't afford it. You might have other owners who say, where's all the money I gave you previously? You might have other owners who say, I just don't want to, or it doesn't need repaired, depending on what it is. The ugly of a special assessment can be when owners can't or won't pay, because when that special assessment hits their ledger, it also incurs late fees and interest, assuming your governing documents provide for that in your collection policy. It's going to put them further and further behind if they're already struggling. And if they sell their home in the middle of the special assessment, then it can create some issues and a lot of arguments back and forth between the new owners and the management company or boards regarding the special assessment. Kiowa does not have a special procedure for special assessments. It pretty much is, it doesn't set forth a requirement, so it's going to be about your governing documents. So advantages to special assessments. The association can assess it, pay it out, and it usually happens very quickly. You're not waiting on a buildup of owner assessments coming in to fund the reserve to pay. You're not worrying about a loan, and hopefully the current owner or whoever the owner is at the time that it hits the ledger can pay the amount off. If the association is able to fund the special assessment in advance, then the repairs or renovation can be done quickly. So if the association has that amount, let's say in its funds, and it pays it out to get the work done and then assesses the special assessment to the owner's ledger, and then the owners can pay it back over time. And of course, a special assessment is going to keep your ongoing monthly assessments or quarterly assessments, yearly, whatever you have, lower, because it's just this one-time special assessment. Again, the downside is that if it's a large special assessment, or If it's an assessment for an owner who already is struggling to pay monthly assessment, it can cause further financial hardship. So while it is good for the association in that it can be a very quick turnaround, it can also be bad for some of your owners because they can't afford it. You might have an increased level of default, and you may not be able to get owner approval overall on the special assessment. And if you can't, then again, you're going back to, okay, what other ways can we pay for it? And if it's bad enough, you might end up doing that obsolescence vote. So payment plans. We see a lot of payment plans for special assessments in a variety of different ways. If you do a payment plan with your owners and the association is not able to fund the special assessment in advance to your contractors or whomever's doing the repair, then you may need to, with payment plans for your owners, it might require repairs to be made in phases. And that's simply because you won't have enough money up front. So if you're assessing your owners, let's say a $10,000 special assessment, it would most likely be rare that your owners would have $10,000 to just pay out right away or within 30 days. So you would put those owners on a payment plan. However, you would then on the back end administratively say, okay, assuming the owners pay pursuant to the payment plan we've offered, whether it's 3 months, 6 months, 5 years, whatever it is, we will have X amount of money by this date, so we can start on phase 1 of the repair or renovation, and then phase 2 as the money comes in, so on and so forth. So then the question is, well, where do you start? Like, which part of the renovation or repair are you going to start with? Again, going back to the roof, I don't know if it's going to work if you say, well, we're only going to do these roofs because we don't have enough money to do the whole building. So all things that you're going to have to consider, and it depends on the association and the documents. So there's no just kind of, hey, broad answer, right? And then the unit sales during the payment plan, it's the same thing. So if the special assessment is posted to the ledger prior to the unit selling, then the owner that owned it at the time it was posted is going to be responsible for that assessment. But again, once the property sells and you hit that sell date, that underlying lien, which is really what the balance is on the association, is all going to transfer to the new owner. And so now you're going to have kind of this split. And do you restart the payment plan for the new owner, or do you just allow the owner to continue with the prior owner's payment plan? And is that even an option? And it kind of depends on how you structure your payment plan. If you have payment plans that you just say everybody, regardless of income or home or location, is going to pay X amount per month based on their unit, then it'll probably transfer over a little easier. If you, on the other hand, allow individual payment plans, well, that's going to be a much larger problem. And one of the biggest things we run into here, as I was mentioning earlier, is sometimes there'll be a special assessment that is voted on, let's say in December of 2021, but it's not actually posted to the ledger until July 1 of 2022. Well, by the time it's posted to the ledger, there's a new owner. And the new owner is now responsible because they took ownership of the property prior to that special assessment being posted to the ledger. They're certainly getting the benefit of whatever the special assessment was for, but it is a very difficult argument to have because most owners are saying, wait, why do I have to do this? It wasn't disclosed, etc. Well, ultimately, that's for the new owner to go back with title and with the realtor and with the prior owner and saying, did you know about this and why didn't you disclose it? But for purposes of collecting for the association, every year we have a couple of them. It just involves, it's a big mess, and it ends up just running up all kinds of fees and costs because people just don't understand, and it's a very difficult issue. So all things to consider with your special assessment. Always think, okay, well, how are we going to collect it on the back end to pay for these repairs? And also consider it when you're looking at the renovations and repairs. It's one thing when you have to, so you've had a natural disaster where you're like, we have to replace the roof. But it's another if it's just a renovation that maybe the board wants to do. That's not what this class is about. That's just a side note. So let's say with special assessments, it doesn't pass and you don't have enough money. So then you go, okay, well, can the association get a loan? Generally, yes, the association can get a loan. Obviously, it depends on your individual association as to whether it can get a loan. But a bank, most banks will finance a loan for common element repairs or upgrades, as well as some other things like purchasing land, leases, equipment purchase. I don't know, let's say you wanted to purchase a snow blower for the association or something like that in real estate. So you look into your bank. One of the questions that usually arises when the association is considering a loan is, how is it going to affect me as an owner? And the answer is, it's not going to directly affect the owners. It's not an obligation of the owners. It doesn't prohibit the units from being purchased or sold during that time while the loan is in place. The loan isn't reported on the individual owner's credit or anything like that. However, what it will do indirectly and becoming directly is, if the association needs to increase its monthly income to pay for the loan, it's going to do that through an increase in assessments usually, or a special assessment. And that certainly will affect the owners. So the loan in and of itself doesn't affect the owners, but the ability of the association to repay it, that might have a trickle-down effect on the owners. Loans, there's some advantages. The nice thing about a loan is you don't have to worry about funding it first. You don't have to worry about funding the project, collecting that money before you can begin on the project. Because remember, with that special assessment, if you don't have the funds up front, if the association doesn't, then you're going to have to wait for all those special assessments to come in before you can begin, and you might have to phase the project. On the other hand, if you get a loan, presumably for, let's say, the entire amount of whatever renovation or repair you need to do, then as soon as you get that loan and you have that funding, you can begin paying it. So you don't have to purposely phase your project based on your economic situation. Instead, you can say, okay, here, contractor, let's go. How do you recommend we move through the steps? It's nice. You don't have to worry about the payment plans for the special assessments or anything like that. But you have to worry about some things. You're going to have, it's not like you're going to have a loan that's, a 2-month loan, right? If you're getting a loan and you're doing a project large enough for a loan, you're going to have a long repayment schedule. So it's going to go 10 to 15 years easily past the period where you needed the loan. So what happens with that is people forget. We all have very short memories when it comes to institutional knowledge, and this is included in that. So you are going to have new board members come in. You're going to have new owners come in, and they're going to wonder, why are we still paying for a loan from 15 years ago? Particularly if it's for something like a roof that has now aged, right? And it's a hard sell when you say, okay, well, thanks. We took the loan out for that, but now we need a new one. And I'll tell you, over the last few years, we have one condo association in particular that unfortunately had hail damage bad enough that it needed a new roof. It did the special assessment instead of a loan, which was fine. And the very next year, of course, and I'm sure you guys are familiar with this, and I'm not telling you anything you don't know, the very next year there was another hailstorm and it damaged the new roof. And so they had to do it all over again. And when you have things like that, or you have a long repayment schedule, or you have a roof that's aging, the owners start to wonder, and the board members start to wonder, why are we still paying this? So if you're going to have a loan, I'd suggest you keep track, you keep good minutes of all of this, and you keep them long enough that the association can look back and say, why did we do this to begin with? So a loan, when you get a loan for an association, it's not secured by the homes, unlike a mortgage. What it is secured by is chattel paper. So it's the right to pledge income. So what the bank is going to use as collateral is the association's future income stream, which means the association has to prove it has one. For pre-Kiowa communities, the Nonprofit Act says you can take out the loan and you can pledge that income stream unless your documents prohibit it. But your documents might require owner approval. Kiowa says you can only pledge income stream in accordance with the documents. Your typical qualification, usually you have to have at least 20 units, and you can't have more than 40% absentee owners. So if you are managing an association that has a lot of rental properties, this might be an issue, particularly if it's a long-term lease relationship. If it's more of a, I reside in the home and I rent out the extra room, that's not as much of an issue because it's not considered an absentee owner. But that's something to look at. And then your ownership concentration. How many owners do you have and how many units do they own? The big one is going to be the proposed budget. The budget should not exceed 50% in order to service the loan. Otherwise, the bank can require you to wait a number of billing cycles to bring that up. Make sure you don't have delinquencies. Don't forget that with your proposed budgets, you have to follow your governing documents, and your board is probably going to have to look at those as well and get approval. And then the last thing is encouraging participation, political questions, right? So how do you encourage participation? Which really means, how do you convince the owners that the association is financially doing well enough to provide the services that it is supposed to, while at the same time convincing the owners that it needs to vote to increase the amount of money the owners pay in order to fund whatever repair or renovation is needed. And I know you know that it's hard enough to get owners to even show up to a meeting, much less actively participate in one, much less vote if you need their membership or you need the approval. So that is always a challenge. It's always easier to get owners involved on the front end, because if they start from the beginning of whatever project it is you're working on, getting them involved at that stage by, even if it's not direct involvement where they're coming to the meetings, but sending out the information about what is happening, that can encourage them to read and review, perhaps ask questions, but at least have a basic understanding of why the board is moving forward in the way it's going to try to move forward. Collection challenges, I spoke briefly about that, but certainly when it comes to special assessments, that can be a challenge because it puts people behind very quickly. People don't always understand payment plans with special assessments. They'll get something in the mail that says, or email or whatever, that they have 30 days to pay in full, or they can pay over a period of 5 years monthly installments. And what'll happen is they read 5 years in monthly installments, but what they read is, I don't have to pay this for 5 years. And so then they end up in the collection office, in the attorney's office, with that argument. Certainly the selling of the home in between there, that can present its challenges. And if you are increasing your current assessments, that has its own set of challenges, because some people either don't want to pay, don't pay, or just can't. So those are all things that are going to also impact your bottom line, because the more collection challenges you have, when you turn those over to a collection agency or a law firm to collect, you're going to start having those fees. And so even if those fees ultimately get recouped from the owner, the association is a lot of times paying those up front. And so now you're trying to fund this special assessment, and you're trying to pay for this loan, and now you're also paying for this collection in order to get the money in from the owners. And then the impact on the community and the neighbors. So you oftentimes, with an association, depending on the renovation or repair, will have anything from people complaining because there's a lot of work being done and it's super noisy, to people being upset because you're putting in something that they like or don't like, or think is expensive or frivolous, or is impacting their view. If you're building, let's say, I don't know, you're redoing your building and putting a pool on top or something like that. So all concerns that we frequently hear about. The biggest thing here is that if you have questions or challenges or you're not sure which way to go, give your attorney's office a call and we'll see what we can do to assist. So that is all I have today. And I'm going to read some questions here. So it says, do you have any recommendations if a community is put at risk by an adjacent property owned by someone else? Yeah, so first of all, I would have the disaster plan in place. And I would do that regardless, even if this isn't your current situation, because it's just happening too often. That being said, if you are struggling due to an adjacent property causing issues, whether it's they're not irrigating or there's people building fires in the lot that you're concerned are going to come into your community, or they've dammed up the creek that's next and it's causing flooding or something like that, I think the recommendation is to reach out to the attorney, because it's going to be, every situation is going to be a little different. And depending on what your documents say and who owns the adjacent property, there might be anything from a, unfortunately, nothing can be done, to a, let's send this demand letter, a cease and desist letter, et cetera, move on from there. Certainly down the road, if you got into, let's say the fire was started and it directly destroyed the association, the property within the association, then there's some legal remedies too you might have. But again, it just depends on the individual association and documents and situation. Disaster that stems from the age of a building, old pipes bursting, causing damage to adjacent or neighboring units. Yeah, so first of all, you should have your little M&I chart that states whose responsibility it is, which it sounds like you do. And then the second key is to look through your declaration and your maps to determine what your governing documents say. Because some governing documents are going to say that if it is pipes that affect only an individual unit, or if it's a circumstance that only affects an individual unit, then it's that associate or owner's responsibility. And others are going to say the association is responsible for all of the plumbing in the building, and due to the age, it's an issue. So the HOA, I would reach out again to the attorney to discuss the specifics of it, because depending on the age of the building and whether or not there's maintenance to be done, the owner might have some type of claim if the owner could prove that it came from different, I mean, there's just a lot to it. Like the owner would have to go back and prove X, Y, and Z. The association is going to have to prove that it's the owner's responsibility. So the first step, and I don't want to get too deep into it because obviously I don't know what association we're discussing or the circumstances. But the first step is to go through your governing documents and make sure that what your M&I documents state match up with your declaration, which they should if they were drafted by your attorney. And then the second step is to give the attorney a call and go, okay, so here's the situation. What do we want to do? Here's what the owner has said. Here's what we're saying. Sometimes you can do a chargeback on the ledger, depending on responsibility as well. I'm sure you know that. So again, sorry, I'm not very helpful with the questions when it's specifics, because it's a little outside the scope of the class, and I don't want to give general advice about a specific situation. So we kind of need to know the details. So please call and we can sort it out. Any other questions? I'll give you just a few minutes. Okay, so thanks for attending today. Questions, give me a call, shoot me an email. If I can't answer it, I'll get you to the right person or the right department. And I hope you have a wonderful day. Thanks.